So we've got Sunni Arabs, Sunni Kurds, Sunni crazies, more Sunni crazies, Syrian rebel Sunnis, Syria, which is overwhelmingly Sunni, but ruled and controlled by Alawites. Arab Alawites.
So where are the Shia?
Over here,
Over here, okay, Iran. All right.
Iran. But remember, this group, in terms of its unique religious beliefs, are closer to these folks than they are to anybody in between. Now, why is Iran backing al-Assad as the head of Syria?
Okay,
They have a religious affinity.
they're Shias.
Right, remember, Iran is trying to take over control, be the dominant power in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia down here is trying to do the same. So Iran figures Assad's a useful ally. There's a whole bunch of nations in this, and everybody's in it for their own purposes. Yes?
I've heard commentary that long range, 20 years, whatever, Iran has a goal essentially of reestablishing the Fertile Crescent. Iran continue all the way across to Lebanon.
Yep.
Your thoughts on that? It's a possibility, I would assume, but you have...
Yeah. And
The
if
problem
not,
is Sunni and Shia get together.
yeah. And if not, well, I would say Iran's goal is to be the dominant power. Other countries can exist, but they bow and acknowledge that Iran is the boss in the region.
Well, two things there. The dominant power that's publicized are obvious, but there's always hidden agendas also.
Yeah, I mean, Iran would dearly love to convert this whole region to Shia.
Well, it's political too. It gives them a port in the Mediterranean.
Gives them a lot of things.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Saudis would love to have dominance over this area as well. They give them a population. They're not a lot of people in Saudi Arabia. It's an interesting country when about half the people that live there are not citizens. They're foreign workers. They have no rights. All the health and education benefits are for citizens, not for guest workers. Okay, we got that? Sort of, kind of? Confused? You're not alone. This is just a listing. Go ahead and just take a look at this. I'm not going to read it. Of the groups and who they've opposed. If there's an asterisk, it means they haven't fought yet. You know, Islamic State's easy. They're fighting everybody. Everybody's agreed. Islamic State's got to go. And if you can see from the map and those charts, they are going away. But that probably will not end the conflict because of all the other entanglements. United States. Whoops. Okay, come on back. Thank you. United States. We're currently fighting the Syrian government on the ground. Special forces in Syria. We have military advisors in Iraq. No troops per se, other than again some special forces fighting IS in both areas. Iran. We are working with Iran in Iraq. And we're doing our darndest to keep our mouths shut about it. Because we have a common goal of getting rid of Islamic State. So you have Iranian groups and you have US supported groups, and leaders on both sides are trying very, very hard to keep them separate and keep them from fighting each other. The Iranians have good military discipline, so do we. So far there haven't been any issues that I'm aware of. Yet. Any surprises here?
Yeah. We're not supporting Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda really is not a major player right now.
Well, I know, but, you know, given our history, we supported the Taliban before they got Russia out of there.
Right?
I would expect that we would now support Al-Qaeda.
No.
Being
no.
a little cynical here.
No, we're not. The Iraqi Kurds, this is the name for the Syrian Kurds. fighting ISIS. Turkey. These two, remember Turkey, 1/3 of their nation is ethnically Kurdish and they want to be independent.
Right.
So the Turkish government is opposing them and calling them terrorists. They're also fighting Syrian rebel forces. Even though they're fighting they're also fighting the Shia Iraqi militias, not yet, but haven't fought yet. The Iraqi government, not yet. They're fighting ISIS, but notice who they're not fighting. Syrian government. Interesting? On the other hand, the rebel forces are fighting the government. The government's fighting the rebel forces. The rebel forces also been fighting Hezbollah, Shia militias in Iran, as well as Kurdish forces, as well as Russia, IS, and the Syrian government. Off and on, not constant. Truce one day, conflict the next. Oh, another truce. An alliance. Alliance breaks down. Very fluid. This is as of right now. It could change. Turkey has just announced they are sending troops into Syria. Up until now, they haven't. They're sending them into an area that is controlled by Syrian rebel forces. It's part of a Russian-backed peace plan to try to de-escalate. The idea is for Turkey to go into rebel areas and just take over. The rebels don't like it, they'll be squashed because, frankly, the Turks have a very good military. And draw borders. The Turks control one zone, Assad will control other zones. It's an attempt to try to curb the fighting, backed by the Russians, by the Turks, by, I don't think, anybody else. So that was just today. Gulf Arab states, they're fighting the Syrian government. They have planes. They are bombing. They are bombing IS. They bomb Syrian government positions. They're not openly fighting Iran yet. Okay.
Your bid on Turkey.
Yeah.
If Turkey is entering, wouldn't that lead you to think the ultimate resort might be a partition of Syria?
Very likely. A Cold War solution. I was going to get to that in a bit, but that's fine. A Cold War type solution where Germany was partitioned after World War II. We could see something like that, with Syria being partitioned into a Assad-dominated area and a opposition area.
I would suspect it'd be even harder. You're comparing to the Allies
Yeah.
who agreed.
Yes.
And here you're talking about a bunch of people, none of whom agree with each other.
That's right. I said possibility.
Yeah, not probability, possibility.
You know, if the Turks come in and say there will be order, they could, you know, if everybody else stayed out of it, Turkey could conquer Syria and not break a sweat militarily. The outrage that would be in the rest of the Islamic world, however, would be great because there would be fears of Turkey reestablishing the Ottoman Empire, which nobody would want but the Turks.
Well, and the-
So
and
an
Russia-
area of free Syria, read Turkey dominated, yeah, that's a possibility.
And Russia doesn't want it either because of military bases along the eastern Mediterranean.
Well, I think Russia's hoping that once they stop the civil war and there's a Turkish-dominated area and a Russian, Syrian government-dominated area, slip up intentional, that Russia might be able to bribe the Turks to leave and then Assad regains control over the whole country. That would probably be their endgame. But the war would end. People would stop dying. Okay, here we go. Here's the spaghetti diagram. And this is simplified. Don't know if you can read it. I made it as big as I dared. Al-Nusra Front. Amar al-Sham. These are Turkestan Islamic Party. These are folks who are fighting IS, but couldn't have interchanged with them. This crew has been over here, this crew has been here, this crew has been allied with Islamic State at one point. Al-Nusra Front claims to have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, But guess who founded them?
Okay.
Al-Qaeda. And up until about 2 years ago, they called themselves Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq. Now, supposedly, they have no such connections. I think it had something to do about them switching over here and getting some Western aid. Now, is that a genuine change? Not? I leave it to your judgment. We've got Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Qatar is a little old. I have to take them out of this now because Saudi Arabia and Qatar are in a major row. But Turkey is backing Saudi Arabia. They're also fighting the Kurds in Syria. Syrian Arab Republic supports military and diplomatically are supporting the Kurds and vice versa. Everybody fights the Islamic State. Here we are up here, along with France, with Saudi Arabia and Turkey in terms of fighting the Islamic State. In terms of opposing Iran, Egypt, and Russia, who are also have some diplomatic support from Iraq, and that's China. Beginning to see China play, just in the diplomatic realm. And they're backing Assad. So the red means they're fighting, the blue means diplomatic, the green means they're supporting militarily and diplomatically. The blue just means only diplomatically, and the red is they're fighting. Now, let's see. Orange, they're opposed. No fighting, but they oppose each other. So, simple, right? Observations. This has ignited long simmering hatreds between ethnic and religious groups. Assad is a brutal dictator. I'll make no apologies for him. But there was peace. Now, whether that's valid or not is another question. Right now, it seems that Assad is getting the upper hand in this struggle with Russia's backing. And there are some people now who are beginning to believe that the war will end with Assad firmly in control of Syria again.
Is that, okay, so we had a shift when we got a new president.
Yes.
And our new president really likes Russia. I mean, you know, he really likes Vladimir Putin. So I'm wondering, are we, I don't know.
On the ground, there's been no change in our policy.
No,
The only difference has been we are bombing IS more,
okay.
and we are bombing these folks more,
Okay.
even though they are allied with Russia.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering if there had been any change.
Now,
No.
there's been rumors of talks, but nothing.
Okay.
The only peace plan on the ground right now is Russia's de-escalation plan, which, as I said, is kind of Turkey taking over part and the Syrian government taking over another part. And the Kurds get to have some autonomy, but only as part of Syria, not as an independent country, which is in Turkey's interests. You have a whole bunch of countries here, and everyone's playing for their own interests. Turkey's fear is if there's an independent Kurdistan, that something could happen. They wind up losing a third of their own country. But for the Kurds to have some autonomy as Syrians or as Iraqis, they can live with it. If Iraqi Kurdistan does have that referendum, and it looks like they're gonna, and they do say, hey, we're independent now, wouldn't surprise me if the Turks invaded. To ensure that there is no Kurdistan that a big hunk of their own country could become part of. So you've got a mixture here of beliefs, ancient animosities between Shia and Sunni, kind of like Northern Ireland with Catholic and Protestant, but it's also ethnic groups and religious groups. And there's an awful lot of beliefs here about hating each other. So, what do we do? What do you do? Military options? It could be done. It would be bloody. It would take hundreds of thousands of troops, and it would take about 5 years. Now, how can I say that with any confidence? I used to teach this at the Command and General Staff College. When you're fighting an insurgency, you have a problem called whack-a-mole. You ever play whack-a-mole in the arcades?
Yes.
You have one hammer, you hit it, pops up, you hit it, pops up. You never fully win. The only way you win at whack-a-mole is if you could somehow have a hammer and a hand over every hole. Okay? That's why when General Shinseki briefed President Bush about going into Iraq, he said, I needed 250,000 troops, I need them there for 5 years. It wasn't just a number out of the hat, it was doing the math. How many American troops would we need to be stationed throughout the country so that we have that hammer over every hole? There was 1 million Allied troops in Germany after World War II. There were attempts by the Nazis to develop an insurgency, but they couldn't. They couldn't start an insurgency because where do you plan? What town or village? There's Allied troops there. Someone's going to rat them out. If there's Allied troops there. Where are you going to get materials, war materials? You need guns, you need bullets, you need all kinds of things. Where are you going to store it if every town and village has Allied troops in it? They gave up. And that's what you do with a counterinsurgency. You have a hammer over every hole until finally they give up. Because a war doesn't end when the victors say it is. A war ends when the losers say it's over. Because the losers can do terrorism, they can do civil war, they can do insurgency operations, they can do all kinds of things and do it for generations. The war continues at some level, conflict continues until the losers say it's over. That's why in classic Western military doctrine for counterinsurgency, you have a hammer over every hole and you keep it there until they give up. Which is what happened in Malaysia in the 1950s. Which is what happened in the Philippines in 1904. Successful examples of using that. It's nothing new. So a military solution is possible. It's a lot harder now because the Russians are there. But it could be done. But are we prepared to put 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers into Syria and Iraq for a 4 to 5 year period? No one has the political will to do that. So that makes military options less likely, because what doesn't work is what most of our political leaders like to do. Limited force. The worst, sorry, I'm going to pick on the George Bush administration, but I could pick on the Obama administration, I could pick on the Clinton administration, because it seems like leaders on both sides have this enamored view of limited war, which almost never works. The war planners for the Iraq invasion, the second Iraq war, were told 30,000 troops. Where did that come from? Rumsfeld. Where did he get it from? It sounded like a good number. He was told 200,000. Because what the military planners were thinking of is not just conquering the Iraqi army. That's the easy part. 30,000 could do that, and they did. The hard part is stopping the insurgency. You needed the rest of them to fan out across the country and prevent an insurgency from stopping. We had so few troops on the ground, we couldn't even prevent the major museums in Baghdad from being looted. There's still antiquities floating around the world in private collections from that one. And the limited doctrine of the Obama administration in Syria. It doesn't work. But our political leaders seem to love it. And not just America, many other countries too. This is the kind of stuff I would teach majors at Command and General Staff College. So, military, it is an option, but at a high price. High price in lives too, let's be honest. Plus you have the Western Crusaders coming in, because that's how a percentage of the population would see us. They would see it in religious terms of a Christian army coming to destroy Islam, and you would have a stronger terrorist response through IS and whatever groups would then form. You'd have to deal with that too. Economic. How did we end that? The Iraq War. There was a period of peace, if you remember, and we left the country. And then IS came in and conquered wide swatches because of the incompetence of the Iraqi government under Malak. But does anybody remember about the awakening? About the 2006-07 timeframe?
Arab Spring?
Nope.
No?
Called the awakening. Happened in Iraq. The Sunnis, most of them, flipped sides. They went from anti-government to pro-government. Whole regions of the country that were controlled by opposition groups suddenly, almost overnight, became pro-government. We bought them off. We paid them, the sheiks, flat out. We bribed them, and they flipped. And that's what ended most of the conflict in Iraq. Then there was to be a government where the Sunnis would be represented. Malak became the prime minister. He is Shia. And he immediately went about getting rid of anyone who was Sunni in the government and turning it into Shia, lording it over the Sunni Iraqis.
And they're the majority.
And they're the majority.
Sunnis are the majority.
Exactly. And they got so ticked off that when Islamic State came through, it was, shoot, they're better than Malik. That's why whole Iraqi division just melted away. They just surrendered. That's how the Islamic State conquered so much of the Sunni area of Iraq so fast. When they hit a Shia area or a Kurd area, they went, stopped. They didn't go very far. They didn't have the local support. They couldn't continue the assault. So are you seeing how beliefs are a part of this? Ethnic allegiances are a part of this? But economics, I mean, we could go back to bribery or supporting some groups, economically starving other groups to try to force a solution. Another is status quo. Allow a Cold War solution. Allow the Russians to do that Cold War solution to end the conflict. Even though it may not be advantageous for the United States. Syria was a Russian ally for a long time. It would again be a Russian ally. The Russians have a major, let's see if I can go back to that. Oh, come on. The other way. Here, come on, here we go. One more. All right, two more. There we go. Right in here, there's a major Russian naval base and a couple of air bases. That's the only warm water port Russia has to the Mediterranean, because the rest of them are up in the Black Sea. Turkey has a choke point. Turkey is still a NATO ally, so it's not reliable. In the event of any conflict, Turkey could close off that choke point and Russia would have nothing down here. So they see that as very, very important to them, enough even to support Assad. One would argue that the main reason they're supporting Assad is to keep that base. It's in their interests. So, our planners again have a mess on their hands.
Well, what,
Yes?
going back to, we were talking about like Al-Qaeda, I mean, what started all this? I mean, these countries were there, and
These countries were there with populations that were being held in place by dictatorships. Okay? Go back to a political map.
the other way.
Well, the other way. Let's try the other way. Unfortunately, this does not work as well as I would like it to. Come on. Go back, ISIS. There we go. Political map. These were separate countries. At one point, these two countries tried to merge in the 50s. The Ba'ath Party. But they couldn't decide on who the ruler, dictator, leader was going to be, so they split. There was a Ba'ath Party in Syria, a Ba'ath Party in Iraq for many years. Assad is still leading the Ba'ath Party, one-party state.
Well,
in
what's
Syria.
a bath part? I mean, I think of bath and I think, okay, I take one in the evening.
Arab socialists is where they started. The idea was we were going to beat the West by having a socialist country. We're going to follow the Soviet Union's model
Okay,
to try to get the West out of here so we can run our own affairs.
okay.
Turkey was, let's copy the West. They had a secular democracy until pretty recently. But now under Erdogan, they're pretty much becoming a one-party state. Which, unfortunately, is a sad thing to watch Turkish democracy go down the tubes, but that's exactly what's happening. Turkey's model didn't keep the West out. The socialist model didn't keep the West out. And that's part of what started with ISIS. Well, let's be super Muslims. Let's go back to God. God will throw them out.
Well, how did we get, I'm trying to figure out, how did we get in there?
World War I, we carved it up. We've dominated the economics.
Then they found oil and water.
Those were Western oil companies who did all the development. They later nationalized it. There is also within Islam a sense of Muslims should control Muslim areas. And there's a feeling that these people, these dictators, do not represent the people. They don't represent the Ummah. They're not chosen. And remember, we're talking dictatorship. You don't have any say. Dictator don't like you, you disappear. You're gone.
Do they really want to get back to a theocracy?
ISIS does. The Islamic
In
State
some
does.
form or another? I mean,
Yeah. The others, not so much.
Well, the Ayatollah pretty much
So I was
runs
thinking
Iran,
Iran,
doesn't he?
you know.
Iran's an interesting case. If the mullahs, if the technical term for Shia clergy, if the mullahs say, you're okay, there's a democratic election. And it is a fair election. However, you can't run unless the mullahs say you are, quote, pardon the pun, kosher. Okay? So if you don't hold to a conservative Shia line, you can't run for office. But if you meet that criteria, you can run for office and be elected. And they do have contested elections. But the range of opinions that is allowed is like this, compared to ours like this. So is it a democracy or not?
But why did they decide, like, to take down the towers? You know, I mean, why did...
Why did Al-Qaeda do that?
Yeah, why
Oh,
did
okay.
they take down our towers? Why
That
did
is
the United
in-
States and...
Okay. Sorry, I gotta go shift gears here a little bit. We have to go back to the first Gulf War. Saddam Hussein had conquered Kuwait, 1990s. He was making every move to conquer Saudi Arabia next. His tanks were, I can talk about this now. It was classified. His tanks were in offensive positions, ready to move in and take the whole oil-bearing region of Saudi Arabia. And with the economics of the world at that time, he could dictate his price to the world and they'd pay it for oil. And set himself up as the dictator of the Fertile Crescent. We land with the Saudi king's permission, we put the 82nd Airborne on the ground. His tanks immediately went into a defensive position. There's a difference in how you set up an armored formation, offensive or defensive. And they stayed in those defensive formations until the first Gulf War started. Okay? Now, we told the king of Saudi Arabia we would leave. And a lot of Saudi citizens, including a guy named bin Laden, were watching. Okay, war's over. Kuwait's liberated. We didn't leave. To bin Laden, that meant that the Westerners could not be trusted. He's a deeply religious man, and he believes that our goal is to destroy Islam. Okay? He's viewing the world through this belief system that says having foreign armies, to him Christian armies, in Saudi Arabia is sacrilegious. So he forms an organization called Al-Qaeda, the struggle. Okay? They form, it catches on, and they form chapters throughout the Middle East. Afghanistan hits earlier, okay? Now, Afghanistan was a Soviet puppet regime. The Mujahideen in the 80s, sorry, it's a little early, in the 80s, fought against this Soviet-backed Afghan government, we sold them Stinger missiles. We gave them Stinger missiles so they could shoot down Soviet helicopters. We helped the Mujahideen. Eventually, the Russians said, we're done. They left. Or the Soviets, more accurately. They left. And the Mujahideen won. Took over Afghanistan. Okay? What happened a few years later to the Soviet Union in the late 80s? Fell apart. Bin Laden believed, remember, beliefs and facts, they don't have to match. Bin Laden believed that if he could provoke the United States into a battle, a major land war in the Middle East, that he would destroy the United States the same way. That we would break apart into 50 countries. Now, is he pretty ignorant about the U.S.? Yeah, sure, you betcha he is. But did he believe it? Yes. Therefore, punch the bear in the nose, or the eagle. Okay? Do something outrageous. Attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. Other terrorist attacks in various parts of the world. There was a plan to take 6 planes. This was before 9/11. A plot was foiled where the Al-Qaeda was going to take over 6 planes over the Pacific and crash them into 6 different cities along the Pacific Rim. They also foiled another plan to crash a plane into the Eiffel Tower and destroy it. This was all before 9/11. But Western intelligence agencies thought, Al-Qaeda, they're a bunch of amateurs. We've got it. We're finding out. We're handling it. They had already struck the towers once with a truck bomb in the basement in the 90s. But it wasn't severe enough to bring the tower down. Then came 9/11. Al-Qaeda believed, bin Laden believed, that the planes would cause damage, but he did not think the towers would collapse. To him, that was victory beyond the wildest expectations. Allah is blessing us. Because he wanted us to get mad enough to go after him in a ground war, preferably Afghanistan, which was his base of operations at that time, so that he could suck us into a quagmire so that we would fall apart just like the Soviet Union did. That's the other side of the story.
And Afghanistan is our longest war in history, right?
Yes. Genghis Khan conquered Kabul and some of the major cities in Afghanistan. He didn't bother with the rest of the country. He said it's too ungovernable. Aside from brief periods of peace, one of them being in the 30s and 40s, ironically, under a King Zog, Afghanistan has never been at peace. There's always been a civil war of some struggle because it is a hodgepodge of small groups, none of whom really get along with each other.
They're tribes.
They're tribes. It's tribal.
Tribes.
The Pashtun are the largest. They're along the Pakistani. Here you go again, the Brits, our friends. They drew a line, cut the Pashtun ethnic group in half. Half's in Pakistan, the other half's in Afghanistan. Divide and conquer. And that's part of why Afghanistan and Pakistan are so intertwined and in such a mess. World War I, who would have thought? Did that help?
Yeah, like little kids.
So that leads to Al-Qaeda, and we have done had a lot of success in knocking down Al-Qaeda. Most of its leadership is dead. Most of the leaders from the early days. Most of the leaders have followed them, and the next generation. They're gone. They are in pretty small pockets, operating pretty independently now.
How about the quality of leadership?
The quality of leadership's declined rapidly. Anyone of any quality has risen to the top, we have found via drones or other means. And sometimes that's people on the ground going in and coming out, and we don't know how it happened, just that they're gone. There's a lot going on I'm certain that we're not aware of. I'm not in a position to know now. Haven't been for 10 years. I'm just guessing from what I know from the past.
Pastor, this
Yeah.
agreement with Iran on arms control.
Yeah.
That's been around for a while, and
Yes.
some people think it has teeth and it's working,
Mm-hmm.
and some people think that Iran got one over on everybody.
Right.
So where do you think that's at, and how is that affecting this whole, how?